Welcome back to Control the Freak, where we talk about all things control freak related. Whether you're a controlling person who wants help to understand the things you do and how to stop it, or you live with or know somebody else who lives with a controlling person, and you want help to understand either how to navigate that behaviour or when and how to extract yourself from it. Hopefully you're going to find all the answers here. My name's Sean Johnson. I'm going to walk you through all of the above. Little disclaimer just before I go any further. I'm aware that there's other psychological issues that can cause controlling motivations, controlling behaviour. You could say psychopathy, for instance. I've also spoken about the autism spectrum. But that's not my field. My experience and my knowledge is in event control behaviour, and that's what we look at here. The kind of people who end up becoming controlling as a result of some event in their life, either a long-term influence event or a high-impact sudden event. So that's what we're going to look at here. Today we're going to look at self-esteem issues. Little caveat, this isn't to excuse controlling behaviour whatsoever. The point of these videos is that with some honesty about my behaviour, with some insight into other people's behaviour, we can get to the nub of the issue and fix it. And I believe that self-esteem is a much overlooked part of controlling behaviour. And what I want to do is help people stop becoming controlling and help other people how to understand controlling behaviour so that they can do something about it, whether that's extract themselves from it or help somebody to change. So that's why we're doing it. So I watched a documentary recently. I'd seen it before. I forgot all about it, but I rewatched it the other day. And I think it's called My Wife, My Lover, Caught on Camera. It's a harrowing story of abuse of a guy called Richard and his wife, Cherie. Now, on this occasion, the wife is the abuser, and she's an absolute monster. She hits him with wine bottles. She beats him up if he doesn't get the dinner on in time. She stamps on him. She kicks him. At one point, she even does a poo on him. She holds a knife to his throat, and she's very conniving and very coercive. She opens the window and shouts to all the neighbours that she's being beaten up, and it's all to cover up her tracks. I think she even phones one of his friends and says that he's beating her up. Luckily, this friend kind of sees through it, and he drives down to visit the couple, and he can see that there's no marks on her whatsoever, but his friend is covered in bruises. And they go for a walk, and he manages to extract from his friends what's really going on, and he reports her to the police. What she doesn't know is that Richard has been filming the abuse for the last couple of years, and he's got lots and lots of evidence of her abusing him and him kind of cowering while she beats him up. And he doesn't raise a hand to her. In fact, his hands are always open. There's never a clenched fist. He's always kind of in a very submissive posture. And they eventually present these videos to her in interview. And first of all, they play a video to her of her threatening him with a knife. And they forget to turn the sound on the video. And she says, well, I was doing that because he was threatening me. So I was giving him the knife to say, well, if you want to kill me here, just do it. And then the policeman realises what he's done and he presses play again, this time with the volume. You can actually hear what she's saying, that she's threatening to kill him. And it's over something trivial, as it always is whenever she beats him up. And I think she ends up getting sent to prison for 4 years in the end. And this was in 2024. So hopefully she's got a couple of years left to go. In my mind, it should have been longer. But the interesting thing for me came really near the start of the first episode when he talks about their first meeting. And he was known as Disco Dick to his friends. He said he wasn't a very good dancer, but he was very enthusiastic. He was always flapping his arms around. So they called him Disco Dick, Richard. And this night that he meets her, he sees her with a group of friends, and she's smiling at him. And he can't believe the attention he's getting from this girl, because he's clearly a little bit nerdy, bless him, but she's quite an attractive lady, and she's paying him attention. And then later on in the night, he sees her talking to his friends, and he can see the kind of pointing and laughing at him. But instead of being upset by that, he kind of feels honoured that she's paying attention to him. Even though she's taking the mickey, he feels quite lucky, a bit of a privilege there that she's doing it. And he almost feels like he's in on the joke, that it's something between them two. It's quite special. As he gets to know her, she tells him about her relationship with her dad and how her dad treated her. and that she's never forgiven him for it. And anyway, as time goes on, she starts abusing him until it gets to the point where she's threatening him with knives and things like that. And it got me thinking about self-esteem. Now, I was going to do this episode in a few episodes' time, but because I've just watched that documentary again, it's kind of brought it forward a little bit because it's right at the forefront of my mind. And I want to look again at my story, but through the lens of self-esteem. And I know I've touched on self-esteem a couple of times in previous videos, but I really do think that it's very little understood as far as controlling behaviour goes. And if we can identify it early on, the very early causes and effects, I think we could go a long way to stopping the worst kind of controlling behaviour. You could argue that if Cherie had come to terms with or faced the issues she'd had with her father, she might not have gone on to poo on her partner's head. And you could also argue that Richard wouldn't have necessarily seen it as a good thing, that she was taking the mickey out of him and felt honoured by it. And it's a similar experience in my story, as I'll get to in a second. But if we can look at it again through the lens of self-esteem, it might help you if you're a controlling person, or if you live with a controlling person, to understand how important self-esteem is as far as concerns the controlling arc. So, remember that I said that I was really bad in school. I was a terrible student. I was incredibly disruptive. And I made my teachers' lives and certainly other pupils' lives a misery. That behaviour was for two reasons, really. The first one, the main one, as I explained, was about getting some control. I'd had all of the control stolen from me at home and I was desperately trying to claw some back, and I was doing that through chaos. I was being a chaotic control freak, where there was chaos all around me and I was in the centre of the storm, perfectly happy, knowing that I was the cause of it and that nobody could stop me. It was all about making sure that nobody could take control of me. A kind of tangential benefit to that is that it helped to make me popular. Now, obviously, I had very little self-esteem because at home I was constantly being told I was thick and I was just constant kind of verbal abuse, really. But the bad behaviour helped my popularity. It wasn't that alone, because I also knew some other badly behaved kids in the years above and the year below who weren't popular at all. They were kind of outcasts and people didn't want to go near them. But I had a couple of other things going for me. One was that I was funny, which might be hard to imagine when you watch these videos and I'm quite dry, but I was really funny. I still am quite funny to people that know me. But I was also a really good listener and I was really good with advice. And there was a couple of reasons for that. The other one I'm going to come to in another episode. But one of the reasons was that I was quite empathetic with girls because I had 4 sisters and I was used to seeing the kind of effects it would have on them when they would come home from school or when they'd been out with friends and something had happened. Either a friend had upset them or a boy had upset them. And I was very used to seeing the effect of that. So I was quite tuned in to girls' emotions, really. So you've got the naughtiness, which kind of makes some kids popular. I was very funny and I was a really good ear and really good with advice. And this kind of put me in a social group that was kind of top of the level in our year. Now, I had a friend in that friend group who was probably the funniest person I've ever known, if not in the top 3. You get those really naturally funny people who are just, everything they say is hilarious and everybody loves them for it. Well, this guy was probably my best friend in this friendship group, but he would relentlessly take the mickey out of me. Now, usually this wouldn't go well. I'd usually react really aggressively to that because I was very, very sensitive. I was oversensitive. I had very little self-esteem. But there was something about how he did it that I kind of embraced. If we go back to the Richard story in the abuse story I just mentioned, I felt lucky that he was doing it to me because he wasn't doing it to anybody else. And I saw it as it almost made us a double act. Now, I would never give it back to him. What I would do is I would kind of say something self-deprecating about me to kind of try and get something out of the joke for me to be funny. But for the most part, it was the dynamic of us two that made us very, very funny. We were always the funniest people in the room. Wherever we were, there was this constant back and forth with me and him, with him being really funny and me being pretty funny. As I say, I felt quite lucky to be in that position because he was so funny. The way that he would focus his humour towards me made me feel lucky. Anyway, as I say, we kind of sat at this kind of top tier in our school. And then I got expelled. And then when I got expelled, it all kind of came to a screeching halt for a little while there. I was lost. I would make sure I met up with my friends on lunch break for an hour to see them, but for the rest of the time, I had nothing else to do. Now, luckily, this same friend who was always taking the mickey out of me had an older brother who was also part of our friend group, but he was about 3, maybe 4 years older than us. He was out of work, and obviously I couldn't work legally because I was only 14. So I started spending all of my time with him. And we had a brilliant summer where we spent the whole summer stoned listening to the Stone Roses. On repeat, the first Stone Roses album, over and over again, smoking lots and lots of draw. But of course, we had to get a draw from somewhere. And so we started being in touch with some of the lower level drug dealers. And then when you do that, you meet the other people that are going to these lower level drug dealers. And you start to build another little crowd. Now, I remember feeling a kind of glamour about that naughtiness, about being involved in the drug world, even at that very, very low level. But as time went on, we started moving up a level and we got to know some of the drug dealers. And these were guys that were a couple of years older than us. Now, I'd looked up to these guys for a couple of years. Everybody did. In our small community, there's quite a lot of glamour attached to these guys. Because it wasn't just the drug dealing that they were involved in. They were involved in kind of low-level criminality, most of them. They were into football hooliganism. They were always into violence. And actually, one or two of them were involved in pretty high-level criminality, in fact, tier one. In fact, there was one or two stories about individuals who, I believe wholeheartedly, the stories I was told about them, that did some of the worst crimes you can imagine. I won't go into it any further than that. Use your imagination. But we started hanging around with these people, and my old friend group kind of moved up with me. I'm not suggesting that I was the guy that got them there. I'm just saying that I was part of that group, and we all kind of moved up. And we started hanging around with the naughtier people. You know, if I thought I was naughty at school, these people were another level entirely. They were really, really naughty. And they had a few quid because they were dealing drugs. And I think they all came from fairly well-off families as well. So even before they started drug dealing, they were always kind of well-dressed and things like that. Now, the other good thing about moving in naughtier circles is that women are attracted to this kind of thing. So as much as I'd looked up to these guys as kind of the glamorous, kind of scary people who I knew that people looked at in that way as well, I wanted to be part of that. Girls hang around these guys as well. So there was always a bunch of girls who I'd seen and really fancied, who I couldn't get anywhere near. But suddenly, I was hanging around with these girls as much as I was these guys. And again, I could be quite empathetic with girls. So now suddenly I'm having conversations with these girls who I've looked at from a distance and been a little bit in love with. And now I'm having conversations with them and they want to spend time with me, because I'm really good at talking to them. I'm really good at listening to them, as well as I'm a little bit naughty and I'm in this group, so I'm accepted. So this was probably a period where, for once, my self-esteem was quite high. I remember lots of times looking around the pub and seeing other people looking at us and seeing either a little bit of fear, a little bit of envy, a little bit of jealousy possibly, that they wanted to be involved in this group, even if it was to talk to the girls. And in some cases, it was to hang around with these guys. There was a certain level of glamour there that I was leeching. I wasn't aware of this until much later on, that that's what I was doing. It was very much that I was getting something out of this relationship. There wasn't very much natural about it in hindsight. For those people involved, the rest of the group, it was just a friendship. But for me, it was feeding something. Then I got with my first girlfriend. As I say, I'd loved her from afar for years. I thought she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And then I get with her, and that is another level up for my self-esteem. I couldn't believe this girl wanted to be with me. And the fact that she did love me made my self-esteem go through the roof. And it's one of the reasons I think I loved her, because of what she did for me. In fact, I think that's the case with most love. One of the reasons I adore my missus is because how she makes me feel about me. She makes me feel worthy. The difference is I've got a handle on everything else now, and with the other girl, I certainly didn't. I was young and I was immature, but learnt my lesson since then. Then we split up. Self-esteem takes a massive dive at this point. And I'm lost and I haven't got much to do. I don't know where to turn. So I go back to my old friendship group. And that's mostly made up of some of the kids I went to school with, that early group I spoke about, some of the kind of drug orientated people that I mentioned, and now some other people, because the rest of it's splintered up because we've all moved on. It's been a few years. Some of these people don't want to be naughty anymore. Some of them have got kids. Some of them have got houses. Some of them have got jobs. And they don't want to be involved in all that immature stuff that matters to kids, but it still mattered to me. So I'm hanging around with these people. And as I say, to one or two of them, I was a bit of an interloper. They didn't really want me around. As far as they were concerned, I hadn't earned my place in the group. They'd been up to all kinds of stuff together in my absence. And now suddenly here I am saying, yeah, but I'm one of you as well. And they didn't really like it. Coupled with the fact that now I entered the group with rock bottom self-esteem, and I was very, very needy. And in some people, a neediness can kind of prompt a predatory response. If somebody seems weak and needy, and particularly with naughty people, it can make them quite predatory. So there was one or two of them who did act quite predatory towards me. They saw that weakness and they zeroed in on it and weren't very nice. I don't blame them whatsoever, by the way, whatsoever. I must have been a nightmare to be around, and I think they were just acting through human nature. Interestingly, the guy who used to make fun of me that was my best friend, all of a sudden the making fun wasn't very nice. It wasn't as light-hearted or as affectionate as it used to be. What it seemed to be now was that he saw these other people didn't like me, and he kind of got some kind of kudos or even self-esteem from making a bit crueler jokes about me. Again, I don't particularly blame him. I think my neediness just brought out a natural response in him. Anyway, so that went all badly wrong. I felt really unwelcome with most of the people in that group. Some of them were lovely to me, but most of the people in that group I think didn't really want me around. So again, my self-esteem is at rock bottom, and I get offered that lifeline by some friends and I move down to London, but I arrive with the attitude that I'm not going to be hurt again. Remember that one? I've been hurt before. So I made sure I arrived in London with some baggage that I was going to expect everybody else to carry for me. And how it manifested then was that I would exclude people more than I ever had. Now, up until that point, I'd always been exclusionary with certain people. Remember that I said that I could identify a particular personality that would have got a bad reaction out of my stepdad, and I would exclude them. But now I was excluding people based on self-protection. I won't be hurt again. And there were certainly one or two people who I was introduced to who were the loveliest people. Everybody liked these people. But I would reject them out of hand because I was taking control of that interaction. And it would be like, well, everybody else likes them, so I'm not gonna. If I was introduced to a girl who everybody fancied, I'd just be like, she's all right. Even though part of my mind was going, yeah, she's fit, she's really hot. I'd be like, she's all right. And I wouldn't talk to her. That was how I handled interactions with people to protect my self-esteem. Because in the back of my mind, there was always going to be, well, if I start hanging around with that person, if I start talking to that person, and then they realise who I really am, they're going to reject me. Now, throughout these years, I developed a bit of a saying, I don't like people. I was known as that guy. He doesn't like anybody. But what I worked out in later life was that's not the case. It's not that I don't like people. It's that I don't like me around people. Because in the back of my mind is a storm going on when I meet people, much less so now. But certainly for the first 40 years, there's a storm of trying to work out where I stand with that person and whether or not at some point they're either going to work out I don't belong or they're going to reject me. And I think that's the case for an awful lot of controlling people. Why they try and control their environment is either they think that they're going to be found out, that they don't deserve to be where they are, or that someone's going to reject them out of hand, or that somebody's going to treat them in the way that relates to the person they really are and not the image that they're trying to project. So, as I say, what I'm trying to do here is highlight the importance of self-esteem. What I really want to do is I like to go into schools, and I like to go into prisons, and I'd like to talk to people about control freak behaviour. But I particularly like to investigate self-esteem issues, get into people's stories and understand how they feel and why they feel that way. Because I really feel if somebody had managed to identify that my behaviour wasn't just bad behaviour, it was about self-esteem and control and why I was trying to get control, that the rest of the stuff wouldn't have happened much later on. And it's arguable that the people in that story, Richard and Cherie, might not have done it, might not have had the relationship that they had. I mean, there's the story that she poos on his head at one point, and you've got to ask yourself, why would you poo on somebody else's head if not to make you feel better about yourself? How is that not a self-esteem issue, that you need that to feel good about yourself? And then Richard quite happily having somebody take the mickey out of him and feel lucky that he's having the mickey taken out of him. I know when I was talking to some of these girls, I was just basking in the glory of being in their company, that other people in the pub would be looking at those girls and would desire those girls, but they were talking to me. And I'm very aware now when I look back at it that all through the conversations I was having with these people, I was thinking, what are other people thinking looking at me talking to these girls? Again, all of this only became clear after counselling. None of it was contrived at the time, and that's not getting the violins out. That's not trying to excuse any of my behaviour, but none of it was obvious to me at the time. And if we can inject ourselves into it early enough with young people, or even with people who have found themselves in trouble for controlling behaviour, if we can inject ourselves in and get to the nub of the self-esteem issue, I really believe we can do an awful lot to mitigate or stop further controlling behaviour. Anyway, I thought that might be useful for you. In the meantime, usual stuff down here. I'd really love to hear some Am I the Control Freak stories. Apart from that, I'll leave you with the usual. Control the freak, not other people. I'll see you next time. Behave.